My sister seated my husband and me away from everyone else at her engagement party because we aren't as wealthy as her fiancé, but her expression turned pale when her fiancé approached my husband and said this to her. My sister, Veronica, is the most two-faced person you'll ever meet. On the surface, she's sweet, but underneath, she's completely different. I know this because we grew up together. Our childhood was tough, we were poor, and compromise was a way of life. We shared blankets in winter, sometimes went to bed hungry, and wore second-hand clothes. While I hated our rundown house, I knew Veronica did too. However, we dealt with our struggles very differently. I channeled my frustration into hard work, focusing on my studies to escape poverty. I earned a scholarship to a great university, which led to a stable, well-paying job. Once I was settled, I helped my parents move into a better home. Veronica, though, took another path. She used her looks and charm to get what she wanted, constantly jumping from one relationship to the next. She'd find men who could give her financial stability, luxury items, or a place to live. She never seemed to worry about money because someone was always taking care of her. Her last relationship was with a rapper who paid for everything and gave her a rent-free place to stay. But, like most of her relationships, it ended badly when he caught her cheating with one of his staff. As always, she came running to me for help, showing up at my door distraught. Despite my frustration, I couldn't turn her away. She stayed with me for a month, lying low. My husband, who knows Veronica's tendencies, wasn't happy about it, but he puts up with it because he knows I have a soft spot for her. You'd think she'd be grateful, but Veronica has always been jealous of me. She resents my stable, comfortable life and my good husband. She even tells me it's unfair that I don't worry about money. What she doesn't get is that I worked hard for this. She hates hearing about our fancy vacations and constantly tells me I don't deserve them. My husband comes from a very wealthy family, but you'd never know it. We met at a conference, and I had no idea about his wealth then. He was humble and unassuming, which is what drew me to him. He doesn't flaunt his money, no designer suits, flashy cars, or expensive watches. He once told me showing off isn't his style. After we started dating, I realized the extent of his wealth. He'd also quietly built his own fortune. Even after we married, we've kept his wealth private from my family. We moved into a bigger house, but otherwise, we live modestly. Besides helping my parents and occasionally Veronica when they truly need it, we rarely discuss money. My husband believes in living modestly, and I respect that. Plus, I know how Veronica would react. She already feels entitled to our help, and if she knew the full extent of his wealth, she'd see us as her personal safety net. After her relationship with the rapper ended, I assumed Veronica would take some time to reflect, maybe even stay single. But no, she quickly found another man. This time, it was James, a senior account manager who had built a solid career. At first, I thought he was just a rebound, but then Veronica actually got serious about him. She constantly bragged about his sports car and rich parents. One day, she invited my parents and me to lunch to meet James. During lunch, she admitted her decision to be with James wasn't entirely about love. She wanted to secure her future by locking him down because he was somewhat rich and very important. She openly wanted a part of his wealthy lifestyle. Before James arrived, Veronica explicitly told us not to mention our poor childhood and to act as if we came from a family with good money and status. She said she'd lied to James about our background and didn't want him to know how poor we used to be. She also forbade us from talking about any of her exes, claiming she'd told James she had no relationship experience. I was appalled. She had lied about everything and wanted us to keep up the facade just to marry this rich guy. I didn't want to lie to James, he deserved the truth. But Veronica argued that once they were married, she'd tell him everything, insisting it was her decision. I hated the situation, but for peace, I kept quiet. At lunch, it was clear how smitten James was with Veronica. Despite only knowing her for 7 months, he seemed devoted. He was polite and respectful to my parents and me, repeatedly saying he wanted to marry her. My parents, swept up in the moment and eager for Veronica to settle down, gave him their blessing. I felt bad for James, he didn't deserve to be deceived. Not even a week later, they announced their engagement. My relationship-hopping sister was getting married. At first, I actually believed it was a genuine change. Maybe she had grown up. I was truly happy for her and hoped it was a turning point. Veronica seemed overjoyed, genuinely excited for this new chapter. She quickly planned their engagement party and invited my husband and me. My husband, who hadn't met James, was curious. When we arrived, it was obvious why Veronica wanted to marry James. He spared no expense. The venue was beautiful and meticulously planned, with professional caterers, servers, and assigned seating at elegant tables. It was polished and extravagant. I quickly spotted my parents near the center of the room. They waved us over, but Veronica intercepted us. She stopped us and said our assigned table wasn't near our parents. Without explaining, she led my husband and me to a secluded table in a far corner, noticeably less decorated. She motioned for us to sit, saying this was our table for the evening. My husband and I exchanged confused glances. I was taken aback. My husband asked why we were seated so far from our parents and them. With a dismissive tone, she snapped that she only wanted well-to-do people near her and James's family. We exchanged stunned glances. Her reasoning was insulting and nonsensical. We were financially stable, and Veronica knew it. She then added, with a sneer, that her fiancé's family was richer than anyone she'd ever met, and since we weren't on their level, we didn't deserve to be anywhere near them. Her arrogance and venom left us speechless. It was clear Veronica wanted to humiliate us, insinuating we were beneath them. The smirk on her face showed she was enjoying it. Before I could respond, Veronica turned to leave, smugly confident she'd had the last word. But then James appeared. He must have seen us talking to her and came over. James greeted me warmly, then turned to my husband. The moment he saw him, James's face lit up with surprise. "Wow, it's you, Mr. Hamilton. What are you doing here?" he exclaimed, visibly excited. It was clear he recognized my husband, and his reaction caught both Veronica and me off guard. She froze, her smirk fading into confusion. James continued, his tone filled with admiration. I glanced at my husband, who seemed calm but slightly amused. He hadn't met James until that evening, but now he seemed to recognize him. The two men shook hands, and my husband told James he was married to me. James seemed pleasantly surprised, saying he couldn't believe he was going to be family with someone he'd admired for so long. Veronica, on the other hand, looked like she was swallowing a lemon. Whatever connection my husband had with James, it was significant, and Veronica had no idea. James then turned to Veronica and casually mentioned that his company had been working under my husband's company for years. In fact, he explained, my husband's company was one of their biggest clients, and James and his team personally managed the account. He seemed proud as he explained how often my husband's company used their services, clearly holding my husband in high regard. That was the moment Veronica's face drained of color, and her eyes widened as the realization hit her. Just minutes earlier, she had gone out of her way to demean us, smugly claiming we weren't as rich or important as her fiancé. Now, she was confronted with the truth, her very fiancé worked for my husband's company. The vindication I felt was indescribable, a karmic gift. My husband remained composed, but I could tell he found the irony as satisfying as I did. James, seemingly oblivious to the tension, then asked a straightforward question, "Why are you sitting so far away from the rest of us?" I looked at Veronica, who looked terrified we'd expose her, and without missing a beat, I told James the truth. "Well, this is where Veronica wanted us to sit." James looked genuinely taken aback. He turned to Veronica, concern etched on his face, and asked, "Why would you make your own sister and her husband sit all the way over here?" Veronica looked as pale as a ghost. She stumbled over her words, clearly caught off guard, and for once, she didn't have a quick comeback. It was as though she was struggling to think of an explanation that wouldn't make her look terrible in front of James. Before Veronica could come up with an excuse, I spoke up. I calmly explained to James the reason behind our seating arrangement. I told him how Veronica had said we weren't rich enough to sit near them or the other well-to-do guests. Veronica immediately tried to interrupt, stammering protests, but I continued, recounting everything she had told my husband and me earlier. I didn't exaggerate or sugarcoat, I just laid the truth out plainly. James's expression turned from confusion to disbelief and then to mortification. He looked absolutely appalled as he turned to Veronica, who by now was visibly panicking. "That's totally inappropriate," he told her, his tone sharp with disappointment. Then, turning back to us, he began apologizing profusely. "I'm so sorry for what happened," he said, clearly embarrassed. "I'll fix this right now. Let me have you moved to a better table near us." While I appreciated his apology, my husband had already made up his mind. He's not one to let insults slide easily, especially when they're as deliberate and hurtful as this. Without hesitation, he announced that we wouldn't be staying any longer. "I appreciate the gesture, James," my husband said politely, "but we are leaving." I nodded in agreement, ready to go. James looked flustered and tried to reason with my husband, but it was no use. Veronica, too, began apologizing frantically, insisting it was a misunderstanding and begging us to stay. But the damage was done. What was the point of staying after what Veronica had done? Sure, she seemed apologetic now, but would she have felt any guilt if James hadn't turned out to work for my husband? I doubted it. My husband and I quietly excused ourselves and left the party. Instead of dwelling on the negativity, we decided to turn the evening into something positive. We went to our favorite restaurant for an impromptu date night, just the two of us. It was refreshing to leave behind the drama and spend quality time together, enjoying good food and each other's company. That said, my husband remains furious about the incident and has made it clear he wants to cut ties with my sister entirely. I can't say I blame him. Veronica's behavior was deeply disrespectful, not just to him but to me as well. At this point, I agree with my husband, family or not, there's only so much one can tolerate, and Veronica has crossed that line. Since the party, my phone has been ringing non-stop. Everyone suddenly has an opinion about what happened without knowing the full story. My parents, along with some relatives who were present, seemed particularly upset. They only saw my husband and me leaving abruptly with no explanation. Instead of questioning Veronica, they've blamed us, calling us rude and disrespectful for walking out on such an important event. It's frustrating, to say the least. Meanwhile, Veronica has been bombarding me with texts. Her tone is completely different now. She's sending endless apologies, claiming she regrets what happened and begging me to call her back. Apparently, James is furious with her, and they've had a big fight. He's insisting she make things right with us, which I suppose is why she's suddenly so remorseful. Thank you for all the comments. I agree my sister needs a lesson in humility. If I accept her apology, she'll never learn. She's only apologizing now because she's afraid of losing James, not because she's actually sorry. This isn't about reconciliation for family, it's about her saving face before her fiancé turns his back on her. Also, I agree with comments that James deserves the full truth about my sister before he makes any deeper commitments. It's important he understands what kind of person she is, especially if she's planning to spend the rest of her life with him. While I'm not one to meddle, I can't let her manipulate everyone, especially when she's hurt me so deeply. My husband and I have decided to take matters into our own hands. We've invited James to our place for lunch. He's been reaching out to my husband, apologizing profusely, so we think a face-to-face conversation will be better. I feel it's time for him to hear the whole truth, not just Veronica's version. Earlier this week, I also spoke with my parents about everything that went down at the engagement party. I explained the whole situation in detail, making sure they understood how Veronica had humiliated us. They were horrified when they heard the full story, and I could tell it shook them to realize how their daughter had treated my husband and me. My parents, especially my mother, were deeply regretful for judging us before knowing the whole story, and they immediately apologized to me. Since then, my parents have assured me they are going to set the record straight with the rest of the family. They want to make sure no one else blames me for what happened, especially relatives who might not have witnessed it firsthand. They understand now that the problem wasn't me, it was Veronica's behavior. My parents have promised to talk to the rest of the family to clear up any misunderstandings. I appreciate their support. Sorry for such a late update. James came over to our place this week. He apologized again for how Veronica had treated us at the engagement party, acknowledging how wrong it was for her to try and humiliate us. He told us he never would have let her do that if he had known she would treat us this way. James pleaded with my husband, asking him not to bring this up to his boss, as it could seriously jeopardize his career. My husband reassured James that despite how my sister had insulted us, their business partnership would remain unaffected. James seemed visibly relieved, and I appreciated my husband's calmness amidst all this drama. It was important to him that business didn't get entangled in his personal mess, and I respected that. Once that was settled, I took it upon myself to be completely transparent with James about who my sister really was. I didn't want to meddle in his relationship, but I felt he had every right to know the truth about Veronica's past. He needed to understand what kind of person she was before making any long-term commitments. I told him everything, how she had been in and out of trouble, how she had a string of shady exes, how she has never had a job, and how she constantly came to us for money, often without any real intention of changing her ways. I wasn't trying to break them up or create conflict, but I wasn't going to sit back and watch James make a decision based on an incomplete picture of who Veronica truly was. I made sure to add that I was happy for him to be a part of our family, but I wanted to make sure he knew what he was getting into. Veronica may have been charming in the beginning, but she had a pattern of using people and then tossing them aside when they no longer served her purpose. James listened carefully, and while he seemed shocked by some of what I said, he didn't react with anger or defensiveness. He told me he had no idea about her past or about our family background, since Veronica had made such elaborate lies. In the end, he informed me that he was going to take some space from Veronica to process everything I had shared with him. He didn't want to rush into anything, and I could tell he was trying to make sense of what was going on. It was clear that he had a lot to think about. At the moment, I feel relieved that I did my part by being honest with James. Ultimately, I hope he makes the right choice, both for his own sake and for the sake of everyone involved. Just hours after James left our place, my phone rang. It was my sister, and she was obviously screaming at me. I could barely make sense of what she was saying through her angry sobs and shouts, but it quickly became clear that James had called off their engagement. Apparently, he had called her to confront her about some of the lies she had told him, but instead of owning up to them, she refused to take any responsibility and just doubled down on her falsehoods. He also told her that she didn't know how to conduct herself in public and that she wasn't mature enough to be his wife. When she tried to argue, he shut her down, telling her that he couldn't marry her because she had lied to him too many times. He was finished and made it crystal clear that he no longer saw a future with her. My sister was understandably livid. She was furious, yelling at me that I was the reason she lost him. She went on and on about how James was her golden ticket to a better life, a life of higher status and wealth, and that marrying him would have changed her life and given her everything she ever wanted. She said I ruined her chance at a good life. I wasn't surprised by her reaction. As usual, she blames everyone else but herself for how her life turns out. This time, I wasn't going to let her manipulate me or use me to get what she wanted any longer. I calmly but firmly told her that I didn't care how much she yelled at me anymore because I was done with her. I told her that my husband and I were cutting her off. No more helping her, no more handouts, no more bailing her out of whatever mess she created. This time, she had gone too far, and I wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. When I said that, there was an immediate silence on the other end of the line. She had nothing to say in response, and I could hear the shock in her silence. It was like I had finally said the thing that she knew was coming but never expected to actually hear. I could almost feel her panic through the phone. I told her that for years, I had let her disrespect slide because I knew deep down that she was jealous of me. I knew she was trying to tear me down, but I always let it go because, in a way, I understood why she felt that way. She was my younger sister, and I wanted to look out for her. But this time, she had crossed the line. She had humiliated us. She had humiliated my husband, and I couldn't let her get away with it. My husband had been nothing but kind to her, even though he didn't particularly like her, and he had always supported her whenever she needed something. He had done all of that because he loved me, and she had completely taken advantage of that. I told my sister in no uncertain terms that she didn't deserve people like us in her life anymore. I made it clear that if she ever showed up at our door asking for help again, we wouldn't even acknowledge her presence. She was completely on her own from here on out. Her reaction was exactly what I expected. She tried to argue, pulling the "I'm still your family" card, trying to guilt-trip me into backing down. She argued how she didn't really mean those insulting words and that we could just forget about the whole thing and start all over again since now James and her are done. But I wasn't going to fall for it. I scoffed and told her I was done and hung up the phone. It was time to end the cycle. Since that call, both my husband and I have blocked her from our phones, social media, and everything. We've also made it clear to my parents and other relatives that we don't want any of them reaching out to us to change our minds about my sister. If they do, they'll be cut off as well. There are no more second chances, no more excuses for her behavior. Veronica is no longer a part of our lives, and I'm at peace with that. It's sad that it had to come to this, but sometimes you have to cut toxic people out of your life, even if they're family.